Nobody ever quit Rick Savage's band. There is always a man standing on the left side of the stage when the lights spin toward the middle and heavy riffs start to play. He doesn't move or step into the sunlight, but he holds on tight to his Jackson bass like it's an extension of his body. It's not like Rick Savage to yell, play solo, or wave his hand and tell everyone what to do. But Def Leppard's heartbeat has been beating steadily from his guitar for more than 40 years, without stopping or changing that on advertising posters. His face isn't the most noticeable one. Rick Allen and Joe Elliott often talk about frightening interviews or crazy years, but Rick Allen and Steve Clark and Rick Allen rarely talk about personal tragedies. In the 1980s, Def Leppard was like a powerful rock machine. Rick Savage, on the other hand, was like a quiet gear that never stopped moving. Absolutely no one calls Rick a hero. He has also never said he wanted to be the center of attention, but the fact that he has refused to give up, even when he is sick, in trouble, or ignored, is what has made him the last person to carry on a heritage that a man whose light comes from being loyal, patient, and not speaking out. Rick Savage's story isn't just about a bass player. It starts with a broken football dream and ends with 45 years of steady music. This is the story of a man who stuck to his beliefs and chose to live and play by the rules. Beginnings. His birthday is February 12, 1960, and he was born in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, England, at a heavy industrial city known for its steel plants, metallurgical history, and clear identity. It is tough, resilient, and doesn't like drama. Rick grew up in a typical mid-level home. His parents both grew up in Sheffield and lived a simple life with a strong work ethic. Rick didn't talk much about them in interviews, but when he did, he called them sensible, quiet, and loyal. These traits shaped how he lived and how he played music later in life. Her bigger brother gave Rick his first guitar. When they were teens, they would play old songs like Maggie May by Rod Stewart or American Pie by Don McLean. There was no schooling, no recording studio, and no stage. Just a small living room, an old guitar, and a deep love of music that would last forever. Sounds weren't a dream back then. This was a safe place to go. Rick could go there when his teenage life got too much or he felt lonely. Growing up, Rick lived in two different worlds. They were each holding a football and a fake guitar. When he was young, Rick Savage played football in Sheffield as a hard-working midfielder who was disciplined, tough, and not afraid of physical contact. These are all qualities that he would later bring to the rock stage without any problems. The teachers at Sheffield United noticed him right away, and he was accepted into the club's youth program. This was a big deal for a teenager in the 1970s. Even though his family backed the rival team Sheffield Wednesday, Rick jumped at the chance to wear their jersey. This was an early sign of how mature he was, showing that he knew how to separate his passion for football from his duty as a professional. Rick was a middle-distance runner and a member of the Hallamshire Harriers Athletics Club in addition to being a football player. This made him very tough, both on the field and later on stage. But things changed quickly when she was 16. Rick's hopes of becoming a professional football player were dashed when Sheffield United turned down his request for a professional deal. It hurt a lot more than just my job. It hurt me deeply emotionally. Rick once said, "I thought I'd never love something else as much as football." No one expected that Rick would meet Joe Elliott, a classmate with a strong love for rock music, just a few weeks later. They started the school band Atomic Mass with Pete Willis and Tony Kinning. The band played glam and classic rock songs by Queen, Slade, and UFO. At first, Rick played guitar, but when he realized Pete was better, he gladly switched to bass to keep the lineup strong. This choice showed right away that Rick was willing to work with others and didn't want to be the center of attention. Rick Savage's childhood wasn't filled with big dreams and bright lights. It was formed by the quiet grit of Sheffield, the discipline of sports, the soft sound of music in the house, and the choices he made that were firm but quiet. That's where Def Leppard's most lasting bassist got his start. Early career, not because they were smart, but because they had guts. Rick Savage didn't know he was about to reach an even bigger turning point when his football dream ended when he was 16. Instead of staying home and pouting, he agreed to meet up with Joe Elliott, a classmate who is a huge fan of British rock and has a bold, unapologetic dream to start the biggest band in the world. That gathering happened in 1977. Rick soon joined Atomic Mass, the band that would become Def Leppard just a few weeks later. Along with their first drummer, Tony Kinning, and guitarist Pete Willis, who was very good. So they could practice without getting kicked out for being too loud. They started doing it in garages, old schools, and others. Rick played guitar at first, but after a few practices, he saw that Pete was much better. But Rick didn't compete or complain. He did something that not many people would do. He stepped up and offered to play bass. No one asked him to do it. That being said, Savage knew that a band is only as strong as its members, who know their role and, more importantly, when to step away. His quick adjustment to the bass made it seem like it was made just for him. Rather than trying to stand out, he used the bass as his own stage. The way he played was based on the ideas of connection over control and support over attention. The way he played made him an essential part of the sound the band was beginning to create. As Atomic Mass struggled to play versions of songs by Queen, UFO, Thin Lizzy, and Slade, Joe Elliott came up with a bold idea: rename the band Def Leppard. This would give them a more glam sound, make it easier for people to remember, and make it their own. Rick agreed with the idea completely, but at first he was unsure because he was afraid he would spell it wrong. Even so, that choice changed the way they thought. They went from playing for fun to thinking like professionals. The Def Leppard EP was Def Leppard's first demo, which they made in 1978. It was badly recorded in a cheap studio, but it got the attention of rock magazines and independent DJs in the area. While NWOBHM, the new wave of British heavy metal, was coming up, Def Leppard stood out as being different, young, catchy, and most importantly, not just another Iron Maiden or Saxon copy. Rick's early years were not exciting. Not a penny, not a name, and no promises. One thing they did have, though, was a strong faith in each other, which was worth much more than any record deal. I remember Savage saying, "We weren't just a band. We were kids with the same dream, and we were ready to do anything to make it come true." Nobody could have known at the time that Def Leppard would become famous all over the world. But somewhere between sweaty practices and riding his bike with amps, Rick Savage found job success, which was something football had never given him: a place to belong and a role that no one else could fill. The Def Leppard EP came out in 1979, and only about 1,000 copies were made. Rick Savage and the rest of the band had no idea that it would be the start of a 40-year musical journey. They were just some 18 and 19-year-olds from Sheffield who played rock music with all their heart and a bit of cockiness that comes with being young. But their first record, On Through the Night, 1980, made it into the top 15 of the UK albums chart just a year later. It wasn't just the first time Rick saw his name on a chart. It was also the first time his quiet faith started to make a difference in the harsh world of music. The fame of Def Leppard exploded from 1981 to 1987, and Rick Savage was the one who kept the band together when things got tough. High and Dry, released in 1981, was the first record that studio genius Mutt Lange produced. He helped shape the band's sound, which is lush, melodic, and tightly structured. Rick was no longer a new player at that point. He had become the player who anchored the bass of every track and made sure that Def Leppard's dense layers had a strong bass to rest on. With Pyromania 1983, things really got going. Hits like Foolin', Photograph, and Rock of Ages went through the roof on US radio, selling over 10 million records in the US alone. Heavy metal used to be all about raw violence, but Def Leppard stood out with their smooth mix of hard rock and melodic pop. Rick made sure that the mix was right by making sure that the bass was always there, but never too loud. Always the glue that holds the drums, guitars, and singing together. Hysteria, 1987, was the real high point. A miracle of production that took almost 3 years to finish because of many delays, including the terrible accident in which Rick Allen lost his arm. Out of the 12 songs on the record, 7 became big hits. It was the first time in rock history that 7 songs from the same album made it to the top of the Billboard Hot 100. Rick Savage was the unseen anchor of Hysteria, even though he wasn't the main songwriter. He used his Hamer Scarab bass to make a silky, stable sound by keeping the beat and tone consistent, especially on songs like Animal, Love Bites, and Armageddon It. Rick thought that emotional accuracy was more important than skill. That if I play with a pick, it's not because it's easy, but because I need to hear every note, no matter how small. When they were at the height of their fame, Joe Elliott was the band's face, Steve Clark was the guitar god, and Rick Allen was the strength of character. As usual, Rick Savage kept everything together. He stayed out of the middle, but he made sure it never fell apart. With Adrenalize, 1992, and Slang, 1996, that golden age went on into the early 1990s. Even as tastes in music changed, Rick and Def Leppard stayed true to themselves. Lots of layers, lots of melodies, and most importantly, never any sloppiness. Rick Savage never won an award for himself, but he was a big part of every Def Leppard win. For someone who always put the band ahead of themselves, that was probably plenty. An argument offstage. Being successful does not always make you happy. Rick Savage saw the late 1980s as the golden age of Def Leppard. It was also the start of a silent fight that no stage light could ever get rid of. In 1994, Rick was suddenly told he had Bell's palsy, a nerve condition that can make one side of the face temporarily or permanently paralyzed. The illness showed up out of the blue. A man woke up one morning unable to smile properly, unable to close his left eye while sleeping, and unable to enjoy eating. That shock would have been for everyone. But for a performer who had been on stage for almost 20 years and was once called the band's quietly handsome face, it was a terrible blow. Not like Rick Allen's, there was no big accident. But no public problem is as bad as Steve Clark's. Unfortunately, Bell's palsy took something else away from Rick, that a part of his look, and even worse. His quiet confidence was something he never showed, but always kept safe. According to a rare interview, Rick said, "I fell into that why me syndrome. I wasn't able to eat well. If I wanted to sleep, I had to tape my eyes shut. Even though it wasn't life-threatening, it made daily life hard in many ways. Every day, I had to tell myself that I was still lucky compared to many other people." He talked about Rick Allen, a bandmate who lost an arm but kept playing the drums with absolutely incredible willpower, as an example of spiritual strength. Rick was sick, but no one in the band made a big deal about it. No one told him he had to talk about it in the same way that Rick had always kept the band's beat steady during storms. There was a quiet respect. After being diagnosed, Rick never missed a show, while many artists choose to rest or go away. He stopped talking to the press. He didn't make the news about his own pain. He changed his stance on stage, talked to the camera less, and let his bass guitar do the talking. Fans didn't know he had face paralysis for a long time. There were small changes. Looks that are a little off-center, an uneven smile, and some limited moves when tired. Despite this, he never complained or used it as a reason to back off. One of the least talked about parts of Rick Savage's work is still there, not because it wasn't exciting, but because it was so calm. Artists' real power lies in the silence they create. Some hurts don't need news stories to make them feel better. They only need to be got through with unwavering determination. The palsy didn't stop Rick from doing things that he became stronger, more grounded, and more like himself than ever. Everyday life. In his personal life, Rick Savage was the one who never missed a beat, just like he was on stage. He was quiet but faithful, loyal but not bossy, and loved more through actions than words. Paige Savage, Rick's wife, is neither popular nor loud, but she has been there for him through every part of his life. That they've never made their marriage a news story, but they do have 3 kids together, one of whom is Paige's from a previous relationship. Instead of protecting the idea of a perfect family, Rick guards a quiet place where he can stop being a musician and just be a dad, a husband, a normal guy. While the band was reorganizing in February 2013, Rick and his family moved from England to Enniskerry, Ireland. Enniskerry is a quiet town with lots of green hills and clean air. This move wasn't about style or comfort. It was about getting away from the stress and noise of the media and making room for breathing after decades of nonstop traveling. There, Rick spent more time with his family, especially his son Scott Savage, who would later join him in starting the clothing line Overnight Angels Crew, or OAC. Unlike many artists who force their dreams on their children, Rick let Scott choose for himself, whether it was music or something else. It was even more meaningful that Scott didn't become a singer or player. Instead, he worked behind the brand, where he could create in his own way with a father who knew how important silence was. "I never thought I'd be in fashion, but Scott pulled me in, and I realized I belonged there," Rick once said. "In the same way I did the first time I picked up a bass." It's not that OAC is a flashy brand with loud ads. 2 generations work together in a creative way. Rick's style is a mix of classic rock, stage-worn textures, and just the right amount of class. While Scott brings in street energy, a rebellious youth, and a modern market mentality. Their work together feels natural because there is no power struggle or clear-cut roles between them. There is just mutual understanding between two guys. Point one who is new to the stage and one who has been there before. There is a small but important element. On their right arms, Rick and his wife both have the same tattoo. The first 8 lines of John Donne's poem, The Good Morrow, which is about true love coming back to life. The tattoo wasn't made to show off or shame people. It was just their way of marking what's most important. There are still 2 people who want to stay together after everything. Rick Savage chose a quieter road than most people in the entertainment business, where divorce, illegitimate children, and romantic scandals are common. He kept his home together and gave his kids the rarest gift of all, his presence. The quiet decisions he's made have built a family story that is much stronger than any public statement, legacy, or influence. He doesn't talk much about love. Rick Savage has never won an award for Best Bassist, and he doesn't usually show up on lists of singers who define a genre. You don't have to be famous to be important, though. They stand like solid walls, and it's their presence that keeps a band together. Rick is one of only 2 members of Def Leppard who has never left. The other is Joe Elliott. From On Through the Night in 1980 to Diamond Star Halos in 2022, he has played on every album, toured with every band, and been on every recording. Those numbers aren't just records. It's a statement of intent in a field where partnerships break down faster than fashion trends. Rick is not a very good bass player. No slapping, tapping, or chasing showy solos from him. That's what he wants: foundation, security, consistency, and depth without a show. Rick delivered a typically harsh answer when asked why he always uses a pick instead of his fingers. I want every note to be clear, no matter where it is on the neck. I care more about consistency than results. He gets a lot of ideas from John Deacon of Queen, who is also a quiet person who always found the right part for the right song. Rick likes Sting too, not just for writing songs, but also for how well his voice and bass work together. At Savage, bass isn't supposed to stand out. Everything else is meant to stand on its own and support it. And his job is even more important in Def Leppard, whose sound is known for being thick and full of layers. Rick didn't write a bass line for a music theory book, but he did come up with a way for a bassist to work in a current rock band. Not to get in the way, but to be necessary. I'm not bragging. I'm just always there. Aside from music, Rick Savage has become a symbol of dedication and discipline, which are becoming less common in the entertainment business. He stayed when the band was losing money. Steve Clark died, Rick Allen broke his arm, and even when tastes changed and Def Leppard was seen as old-fashioned, he didn't defend himself or argue. He didn't stop playing. It's still common for younger artists, especially bassists in hard rock and melodic metal, to look up to Rick. They do not learn how to perform from him. They learn loyalty, self-control, and how important it is to put the group ahead of their own needs at a time when everyone wants to be the center of attention. Rick decided to be the one who holds things together and whose absence would make everything fall apart. A jaw-dropping solo or a hit song with his name on it are not what Rick Savage is remembered for. There is unshakable loyalty, consistency, and the quiet proof that music can last no matter how much the world changes if it is played with unwavering belief. Right now, life. At 64 years old, Rick Savage still has the same amount of energy when he hits the stage, as if time wasn't something he ever paid attention to. No noise on social media, no shocking comments, and no requests to be the center of attention. Rick wants his life to be steady, deep, and never offbeat, just like the bass he plays. Diamond Star Halos was Def Leppard's 12th studio album, which came out in 2022. In this day and age of streaming music and short attention spans, it's not easy to sell a 15-track album with harmonies and hints of country, as well as other genres. But Savage didn't care. The record wasn't made to follow the latest trends, in his opinion. It was a statement of art based on nearly 45 years of shared history with the band. It was made while the pandemic was going on, with each member working from their own home studios. Rick used basic software, a laptop, and an audio interface to record his bass lines. But the depth of the music wasn't lost because the gear was simple. We had more room to try new things because we weren't together physically. It wouldn't worry anyone if I did a part 12 times. In terms of creativity, it let me explore a new area I hadn't explored before. Rick used more than just his new Jackson guitars. He took out an old Fender jazz bass that had been hanging on his wall for almost 30 years and barely worked for one song, called Open Your Eyes. In the end, the moment I plugged it in, I was amazed. That's the sound I was looking for. Sometimes an old thing can help you remember why you started in the first place. Along with his son Scott Savage, Rick also started the clothesline Overnight Angels crew, OAC. That Rick's legacy is the music he has made over many years. His heritage is now passed on through fashion in a new way. They don't follow fads or scream to get people's attention. Dad and son both use the same visual language, which is a mix of old-school glam rock and current street style. As a quiet way to say something, Rick has worn OAC's leather jackets, denim shirts, and signature pieces on set during recent trips. To know who I am, I don't need high-end names. From 2022 to 2024, Rick went on the stadium tour with Def Leppard and Mötley Crüe. It was a huge run where they shared the lead vocals and played to packed arenas in the US, Europe, and South America. Rick kept playing his bass on stage even though it was cold, and he had a lot of work to do. There were no breaks or extra effects. "We used to want to be the biggest band in the world," he said. "After 40 years, all I want is to play well every night and see people still singing along with the songs we wrote. The most amazing thing ever, in my opinion." Absolutely no incidents. No sad farewells. Rick Savage lives the life of an artist. He is quiet, strong, and free to make any decisions he wants. How big the stage is doesn't matter to him, that he wants to stay on it and be with the people he loves. Rick Savage is not a flamingo that burns bright and wild. He's the bright spark that keeps the fire going during British rock's long winter. All of that can change after just one tour, and artists come and go like stage lights. Rick, on the other hand, decided to stay with the band and be himself. He has never put out a solo record, had a public fight with a band member, or said goodbye or hello. He just kept playing, quietly doing his part, and keeping the beat for Def Leppard. That stability doesn't need to be shown. It shows that it exists by being there. As soon as Rick plugs in his bass, all he wants is a quick look from the crowd. He also doesn't need the attention when he starts the first pulse of Photograph, Rocket, or Pour Some Sugar on Me. Everything that matters to him has always been there: the boys, the music, and a never-ending love. Rick Savage has performed with his own band for more than 45 years. And that choice is a quiet, endless light, which is rare in any time. While listening to Def Leppard, have you ever seen Rick Savage? How do you think to describe a great artist? Is it skill, charm, or quiet persistence like his? Comment below. And if you think being loyal is smart in and of itself, please help get the word out. Because the person who is the quietest isn't always the one who dies.